So in this video, continuing with solving quadratics, we'll be looking at how we can solve a quadratic from factorising and using double brackets. Now, if you're not too sure on how to factorise a quadratic into double brackets, then I strongly recommend that you watch a previous video and there'll be a link in the description below. And also a link to the song where this joke is actually quite funny. Now, a common way of solving a quadratic equation is by factorising the equation first. Now, this eliminates having an x squared and an x in the equation, meaning that a solution can be found by splitting the equation into two single parts that are being multiplied together. Now, the key to solving any quadratic equation remains the same, whatever method you choose to solve it with, excluding graphically that is, and that is by making it first equal to 0. Now, you might find that some low level and some, let's say, 1 or 2 mark questions might be where it's already equal to 0, so you don't need to do any rearranging. However, just be wary that on some higher level papers or some big mark questions, you may have to do some rearranging first and make it equal to 0 before you can then use this method to then go on and solve it. Now, once you have factorised a quadratic into a product of two parts and that it is equal to 0, then one part must equal 0, because obviously when you're multiplying and two things always being multiplied together, then at least one of them must be equal to 0. Now, by factorising, if you're not too sure on how to factorise a quadratic into double brackets, I'll put a link to a video where I show you how to actually do that. Now, once you have got two sets of brackets being multiplied together and obviously it's equaling to 0, then we could then go on to solve it as we would normally. Now, as we talked about, is that a quadratic equation, once you factorise double brackets, splits it up into two parts. Now, one part of this is x plus 5 and another part is x minus 7. Now, as they both multiply together and equal 0, it means that one of the parts must equal 0. So here I've got x plus 5 equals 0. So then all I've got to do is take the 5 over to the other side by subtracting. So x equals 5. Now if I take the other bracket, so here I've got x minus 7 equals 0. And I take the 7 over and that turns it to a plus, so that 7's eliminated. So x equals 0 plus 7, which is 7. And there are my two solutions. So one solution is x equals 7, x equals 7, and the other one is where x equals 5. Now moving on to another example. So here, again, we've split it up into two parts. So one part is 2x plus 3, so I've got 2x plus 3 equals 0. So I take the 3 over first, so then that then becomes 2x equals minus 3. And I take the 2 over, and so I get, and that cancels that, so I've got x equals 3 over 2. Now if you have any sort of answers or solutions where it equals a decimal or doesn't quite divide nicely, then always leave it as a fraction. That's one bit of information, sort of tip that I'll always say. Now moving on to the second bracket, so again I've got x minus 1 equals 0, so I take the 1 over to the side to make it positive, so I've got x equals 1, and there are my two answers. So in this particular question, x can equal 3 over 2 or 1. Then moving on to the next one, so again here looking at this part, I've got x minus 11 equals 0, so I take the 11 over, turns to a plus, so I've got x equals 11 as one solution. And then moving on to the next one, I've got x plus 8 equals 0. Take the 8 over to the other side, so x equals minus 8. So the solutions for this particular question, I can write neatly, is x equals 11 or minus 8. And there is your final answer. Now again, with each of these brackets, because obviously like I reiterated, you always make them equal to 0 because you've got an equal 0 of what the actual equation equals. Now moving on to the next set of questions. So again, splitting up into two parts. So I've got 2x minus 5, or 2x plus 5 equals 0 rather. So I take the 5 over. So I've got 2x equals minus 5. And then get rid of the 2, so I've got x equals minus 5 over 2, and again I'm going to leave it as a fraction rather than converting it as a decimal. And then for this one here, I've got 5x minus 6 equals 0, so again take the 6 over, so I've got 5x equals minus 6, and then divide by the 5, so I've got x equals minus 6 over 5, and there is my final answer. Now, with practice, you'll be able to see the bracket and you might be able to do it in your head and go straight to the answer. And again, that's absolutely fine. As long as you're not making any mistakes, then it's all good. So here I've got x plus 3 equals 0. So x equals minus 3. And here I've got x minus 3 equals 0. So again, take the 3 over to the other side. So I've got x equals plus 3. So here the answer is going to be x equals minus 3 or plus 3. Or you can also write it as x equals plus or minus 3. And if you've not seen that symbol before, don't worry about it too much. I'll just leave your answer by writing it out in full. So for the next one, you can see we don't have a double bracket, but again, we still need to make the two things equal to 0. So here, x equals 0, so that's just one answer. Or, and let's just get a different color, or this must equal 0, so I've got x minus 1 equals 0. So I take that over to the other side, so x equals 1, and there is my final answer. And moving on to the next set of examples, and again, we can do this relatively quickly. So here we've got 11x plus 5 equals 0. So I've got 11x equals minus 5. And again, just be wary of when you are working with negatives, taking things to the other side. So that's one answer. And then I've got 2x minus 3 equals 0. So 2x equals 3, x equals 3 over 2. And then with the next one, so here I haven't got double brackets, but remembering what this means, so this means x minus 2, x minus 2. So now I do have two brackets. So again here, as they're both the same, I've just got x minus 2 equals 0, so x equals positive 2, and I've only got one solution for this. Now when you've got a number in front of a bracket, then that doesn't really make a difference, because again, 2 can't equal 0, so that must always stay 2. So it's one of the brackets that must equal 0. So I've got x minus 4 equals 0. So again, I've got x equals 4. And then taking the second bracket, I've got x plus 9 equals 0. Take the 9 over. So I've got x equals minus 9. So again, I've just got two solutions of 4 and minus 9 for that particular question. Now there are other ways of solving a quadratic equation. That is by using the quadratic formula, which tends to appear on the higher paper and also on a calculator paper. The method I've showed you could appear on both the higher and the foundation, but also on calculator or non-calculator, even though we didn't actually use a calculator. We can also use a method of completing the square, or CTS as I like to call it, which again only really appears on the higher paper. Or you can solve a quadratic equation by using a graph. Now by using a graph, all you've got to do is plot the equation of making it y equals the equation, and then finding where it crosses, where the parabola or where the U-shape or N-shape crosses the x-axis, as shown in the introduction of solving equations. Now I will be producing a video on each of these methods, so check out the quadratic playlist for videos and worksheets on all of these methods for you to practice and revise.